Hey everybody, welcome back. James Phifer with ACCU, and in this video, we're going to be talking about one of the industry's hottest topics, insurance. Just as a full disclosure, I am not a licensed insurance provider, so it's really important that you not take this as insurance advice. This video is more related to what you should expect from your HOA management company, potentially your manager, and really setting the stage for your expectation moving into renewals this year. So if you've been serving on a board the last couple of years, you really understand the difficulty with insurance. Premiums have gone up exponentially, renewals are coming in last minute, and it's really leaving a lot of boards incredibly frustrated. And so that's what I want to address today. Why is insurance going up? Well, the primary insurers are no longer insuring the market. With all the hail, the fire, the tornadoes that have come through the state of Colorado, it really has pushed a lot of the primary insurance companies out of the market. So as I understand it, the secondary insurance market has opened up, but they kind of choose what the cost is going to be. On top of that, the new fire maps have expanded throughout the state of Colorado, making it more expensive to insure a lot of communities across the state. Okay, so now what's important when it comes to how you're interacting with your management company? First off, majority of management companies do not carry an insurance license. They need to go to a broker. The broker goes out to the insurance companies to be able to get the bids in. They are working with the insurance companies almost up to the very last minute as of the last couple of years, meaning that the boards have sometimes days, if not hours, to make a decision on what insurance the community gets. And that's leaving many of you boards incredibly frustrated. What we're asking is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If your manager is doing what is required of them, they are going out to obtain these proposals in time. They are not allowed to broker your insurance policy. That has to be done by a licensed and qualified insurance professional. So it is on them to be able to get the information back to be able to be provided to you. So please take a look at that. Take a look if your manager went out to get those proposals on time, and also check to make sure that they submitted them to you immediately after they were received. If they've done both of those things, they cannot control the costs and they cannot control when you receive those proposals. So with that, my name is James Phifer with ACCU. If you want to talk in detail about any of this, you can always give me a call. My direct line is 303-733-1121. And until next time, I look forward to bringing you additional educational content. Thanks again.